Picture yourself walking through the mist-shrouded forests of medieval France, where ancient oaks whisper secrets older than kingdoms and shadows dance with memories of forgotten kings. The year is 1307, and something extraordinary is about to unfold. A meeting that history tried to erase, a pact that would reshape the very foundations of power in Europe, and a bloodline so sacred that men would die to protect it. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of history's most carefully guarded mysteries. The secret alliance between the Knights Templar and the last surviving heirs of the Merovingian dynasty, a story so dangerous that it was buried beneath centuries of silence, encoded in stone, and whispered only in the darkest corners of the monastery halls. You've heard fragments before. The Templars, those warrior monks who supposedly guarded pilgrims to the Holy Land. The Merovingians, the long-haired kings of early France who claimed divine right through blood, not conquest. But what if I told you these two forces weren't separate threads in history's tapestry, but part of the same carefully woven conspiracy? What if the fall of the Templars and the rise of their enemies was orchestrated to hide something far more explosive than gold or relics? Before we venture into this labyrinth of secrets, let me tell you why this story matters. This isn't just ancient history gathering dust in forgotten archives. This is about power, about legitimacy, about the very foundations of how we understand divine authority. Because hidden within this tale lies evidence of a bloodline so potent that it threatened to topple not just kingdoms, but the entire structure of medieval Christianity itself. So settle in, let your curiosity take the reins, and prepare to discover a truth that powerful men spent centuries trying to bury. Because tonight, we're not just telling a story, we're unraveling a code that stretches from the forests of ancient Gaul to the secret vaults beneath European cathedrals. It begins, as many secrets do, with a death that changed everything. The morning fog clung to the valley like a shroud as riders approached the hidden monastery of Saint-Sepulchre. The year was 1285, 22 years before the infamous Friday the 13th that would see the Templars arrested en masse. But this meeting, this quiet convergence in the pre-dawn darkness, would set in motion events that would echo through centuries. Brother Guillaume de Beaujeu, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, dismounted his warhorse with the deliberate grace of a man carrying immense burdens. His white mantle, emblazoned with the distinctive red cross, seemed to glow against the grey stone of the abbey walls. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a figure history barely remembers, yet whose presence that morning would alter the course of European destiny. This man, known only as Saiga in the monastery records, claimed descent from a bloodline that most believed had died out centuries earlier. He was, according to whispered genealogies and carefully guarded family trees, one of the last surviving heirs of the Merovingian kings. Those same mystical rulers who had once claimed their authority came not from papal blessing or military conquest, but from something far more profound, something that linked them directly to the sacred. The Merovingians had ruled the Frankish kingdoms from the 5th to the 8th centuries, marked by strange traditions that set them apart from every other royal house in Europe. Their kings never cut their hair, believing it contained their spiritual power. They claimed visions, performed healing rituals, and ruled through mysticism rather than force. Their subjects didn't just obey them, they revered them as semi-divine. But then, suddenly, they were gone. Not through war or rebellion, but through quiet political maneuvering. The last Merovingian king, Childeric III, was deposed in 751 and sent to a monastery, his sacred hair shorn, his bloodline seemingly extinguished. The Carolingian dynasty took their place, blessed by the Pope and backed by the Church. History moved on, and the Merovingians faded into legend, or so it appeared. Because bloodlines, true bloodlines, don't simply vanish. They flow underground, through daughters and younger sons, through marriages arranged in secret, and children raised in shadow. and by the late 13th century, rumours had begun to surface in the most unlikely of places. Not in royal courts or papal chambers, but in the fortified commanderies of the Knights Templar. The Templars, founded in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims travelling to Jerusalem, had grown into something far more complex than a simple military order. They were bankers, architects, diplomats, and scholars. Their network stretched from Scotland to Cyprus, from Portugal to Poland. They answered to no king, owing allegiance only to the Pope himself. And within their ranks, in the highest circles of their mysterious hierarchy, knowledge was preserved that the outside world had forgotten. Knowledge about bloodlines, about sacred genealogies, about claims to legitimacy that predated the authority of Rome itself. Brother Guillaume understood this better than most. He had spent decades in the Holy Land, not just fighting Saracens, but excavating beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Templars had discovered things there, ancient things, documents and artifacts that spoke of truths the Church preferred to keep buried. And among these revelations was evidence of a bloodline that threatened to rewrite the entire narrative of Christian authority. The meeting at Saint-Sepulchre was no accident. Guillaume had been seeking out Merovingian descendants for years, following genealogical threads through the noble families of southern France. The Cathars, those heretics who had been brutally suppressed during the Albigensian Crusade, had preserved some of these bloodlines. And now, with pressure mounting against the Templars from King Philip the Fair of France, time was running out. Seeger carried with him that morning something more precious than gold or relics. He bore documents, carefully preserved parchments that traced his lineage back through the centuries to the very foundation of the Merovingian dynasty. But more than that, these documents contained claims that would have shaken the foundations of medieval Europe. Claims about the true nature of divine kingship, about bloodlines that carried within them something more than noble blood. As the two men entered the monastery's inner sanctum, past guards who had sworn oaths of secrecy that bound them unto death, they were embarking on negotiations that would establish one of history's most dangerous alliances. The Templars, with their vast wealth, their military might, and their network of loyal knights across Europe, would pledge themselves to protect something more valuable than any treasure. They would become the guardians of a bloodline that claimed descent not just from ancient kings, but from the sacred itself. The pact they forged that morning would remain hidden for over 7 centuries, encoded in symbols carved into cathedral stones, embedded in the layout of Templar churches, and whispered through generations of initiates who understood that some truths were too dangerous for daylight. But every secret, no matter how carefully guarded, eventually seeks the light. And the story of what transpired between the Templars and the Merovingian heirs is about to emerge from the shadows where it has waited, patient as stone, enduring as blood. The documents Seeger carried that morning would have burned the hands of any ordinary man. Rolled in oiled leather and sealed with wax that bore no recognizable crest, they contained genealogies that stretched back not just to Merovingian kings, but beyond them to something that challenged the very foundations of Christian doctrine. These weren't merely family trees. They were claims to a heritage so explosive that their revelation could have toppled thrones and shattered the authority of Rome itself. Brother Guillaume studied the parchments by candlelight, his weathered fingers tracing lines of descent that most believed were myth. But the Templars had seen too much during their time beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones to dismiss anything as mere legend. They had discovered chambers that predated Solomon's temple, scrolls written in languages that scholars claimed were lost, and artifacts that spoke of truths the Church had spent centuries trying to bury. And now, in this quiet monastery hidden in the French countryside, they were being offered guardianship of something that made their Jerusalem discoveries pale in comparison. A living bloodline, a breathing continuation of something sacred that had survived the fall of empires and the rise of new faiths. The pact they negotiated over the following days was unlike any agreement in medieval history. The Templars would provide protection, not just for Saiga himself, but for his entire lineage. Safe houses would be established across their network. Documents would be copied and hidden in multiple locations. Most importantly, the bloodline would be preserved through strategic marriages, carefully arranged alliances that would scatter the heritage across noble families throughout Europe, while keeping its true nature hidden. In exchange, the Merovingian heirs would provide the Templars with something equally valuable: legitimacy. Not the manufactured authority granted by papal bulls or royal charters, but the ancient kind of legitimacy that flowed through blood and bone, that connected earthly rule to something far more profound. Because the secret the Templars had discovered beneath Jerusalem, the truth that had driven them to seek out Merovingian descendants, was this: the bloodline didn't end with forgotten Frankish kings. It stretched back further, through marriages and unions that early church fathers had worked desperately to obscure. Back to a union that, if proven, would fundamentally alter how the world understood divine authority. The implications were staggering. If the Merovingians truly carried this heritage, then their claim to rule came not from papal blessing, but from something infinitely more powerful. They weren't just kings by divine right, they were divine by blood. But such explosive knowledge came with equally explosive dangers. King Philip the Fair of France was already moving against the Templars, driven by debt and suspicion. The Church, sensing threats to its monopoly on spiritual authority, was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about Templar beliefs and practices. And across Europe, the Inquisition was growing in power, hunting heresies with ruthless efficiency. The alliance forged at Saint-Sepulchre would need to operate in absolute secrecy. Communication would flow through coded messages embedded in architectural plans, in the placement of stones in Templar churches, in symbols that appeared innocent to outside observers but carried profound meaning to those initiated into the mystery. They developed an intricate system of preservation. The bloodline would be protected through multiple strategies. Some descendants would be hidden in plain sight, married into established noble houses where their true heritage would be forgotten by all but a select few. Others would be secreted away to remote locations, their identities obscured